Hi there. So you've downloaded the Kinship and Contradiction 25-page zine intro to Constellating Power of Relational Shadow between the personal and the collective. If you have not found it yet, go to my website, sarahmartinez.com. You will see a pop-up, click on the pop-up, enter your email address, and your zine will be sent to your email address as a PDF. This means you will also receive a notification when the first modules start to come out. As I'm becoming more accessible and starting to step us through practices of collective liberation, which can be quite confusing because collective liberation is an inside job, we cannot wait for the systems we live in to change. We are the change. Let's go through the zine together. So this practice is called Kinship and Contradiction because it is about the return to kinship, which we discuss as a relational and multidimensional way of viewing, mapping, and understanding our existence. The lens from which we view, map, and understand is so important because the width and the depth of that lens is also co-creator in the width and depth of a reality. So creating what is possible from the impossible. We aim to vision further than a previously unimaginable horizon, and we aim to hold the vision that on the other side of this unimaginable horizon is ultimate support, ultimate joy, love, peace, balance, reciprocity, and right relation. If we just look at the part of a multidimensional view, so say, for example, ecological kinship, as right relation, so coming back into balance with our environment and nature, it is clear that this will take longer than our lifetimes to return into due to infrastructures which are larger than us alone. So we are looking at developing a transgenerational lens and dialogue here, one that is able to feed into a collective and generative wisdom pot, not only visioning into futures, but also embodying. So we do this including our bodies to manifest the energy signature that we want to resonate out. As we know, the heart resonance and how our hearts are held and centralized in our body-mind is active in co-creating our realities. How much a body is able to hold, how that body is receptive in relation or not, these are very important aspects of the center of our practice. So we're moving out of a worldview and a bias in knowledge production that comes from the mapping of realities and cosmologies that assume we are more being than we are non-being. So non-being is the space in between us, in between all things, and that's what we call relation. And this is a yin space, which is also the spiritual aspect of everything that is matter. So everything that is manifest is actually kind of dormant yin. So relation exists and holds in these spaces between, even without goal-driven instigation. There is always mutation, mutability, transmutation happening between us because there is an infinite amount of zooming in which we could do. So smaller than cells, smaller than atoms, where energy and frequency is still in mediation between, i.e., positive and negative charges or parts or frequencies. So seeing and being seen, gaze, recognition, resonance, and the sensing body, listening and perceiving, witness, synchronicity are all access points into relation. Relation is the web, the interconnectedness of all things. As non-being, this is also chaos, change, multiplicity, contradiction, porosity, and wetness. So the way our egos and the way our self-image are formed through Western lens and dominant patriarchal, capitalist, colonial, and imperial socio-cultural worldviews, we are very dry in our beingness at the moment. There is a rigidity in the perception of being which does not allow us to see or recognize relation or our own inner multiplicities and interconnectedness to all that there is. Our perception of things in this separatist state or of our own individuality is the result of an energetic disconnectedness from a much greater whole, greater cycles, greater ebbs and flows. So imagine we are in a band and humans are playing instruments on our own. We don't realize we are playing with nature and there is a symphony all around us because we're missing to hear it, because we're too wrapped up in the expectations and our ideals of our own music. So this rigidity and fusion to a centric bias and to separatism is what we aim to break apart through this practice in a way that accesses a depth, a fluidity, and an allowance of our psyche as an essential connection to our multidimensionality, which enables radical transformation and radical forms of what kinship is and means to emerge, you know? I am not here to script the way or a way towards kinship because I'm on this path, as is everybody else. I can share tools in order to create space within our connected psyches, in order for us to access a space of emergence, and from emergence, kinship will bloom through us recognizing each other and through our combined resonance and our co-creation. It's not something that I assume will come from my head. This naturally means that you are all very important here, and this kind of work needs to be collectively mediated with. So this first gift book is about preparing to practice with constellating relational power between the personal and the collective. And we're talking about developing a language to articulate the context of what is touching us and how it is touching us through the levels of the deeply personal, the transpersonal, and the metaphysical, or you could say the karmic, so outside of lifetimes. We're also looking at the intergenerational and the sociocultural, the systemic. So I understand this can be very overwhelming, and that is why I'm making this video. I want to let you know that the detail and the discernments are here, especially in the fact that we are talking about the proximity and different categories of relations that touch into us, in order to help us get very nuanced about which kind of energy needs dismantling and refusals, and which kind of energy needs rerouting, and how it could be rerouted within your own grid. So which kind of energy we need to re-centralize, to nurture, and how we could go about that fostering process. So this has something to do with protecting, sheathing what's important, and accessing courage to world build and trust your vision. A deeper knowing of our position and our vocation will help us with momentum, direction, and give a point to getting through the hardest parts of awakening, individuating, integrating shadows, and claiming power. Because the bottom line is, no one is going to come and give this to you. You will need to claim it for yourself. I'm now going to share my screen with you, and let's read through this together. So on this front page, we have 4 tenets: reanimation, relation, return, and remembering kin. So reanimation, I mean everything is besouled. Everything encountered is holding of soul. That soul is a web. Relation speaks about interaction. So when we're talking about soul as a web, through relation, soul is called, magnetized, and attracted, or expelled, unseen, and unheld. In relation, how power moves affects an entire grid. Information and data reverberates. For the body, relation is frequency and felt sensation. Relation governs the receiving ability of messages in how much flexibility or elasticity we have access to. Relation shapes how communication and resonance flows. Return, we exist within cycles. Return is our right. To return is to practice. This is also political and recognizes a right of return for all beings after exile. Return recognizes that there is enough space in the ever-expanding forms. Remembering kin, we put each other back together through gaze, through the resonance we hold in our bodies. This practice is non-hierarchical, co-creational, communal. Kinship is both solidarity and communion. So I'm going to view this PDF with a 2-page up view. I would recommend to travel through the PDF with 2-page up, unless you print it out. So welcome to the first container for kinship and contradiction. It's designed to accompany our deepening connection with spiritual frameworks within eras of rebalancing. And our core aims are transformation, resilience to navigate a changing world, transmutation, to manage a dismantling of power over systems and not a perpetuation, recognition, to find our own connection to infinite witness through intuition and sensorial wisdoms, and return into right relationship as a channeling body, and to allow the return of all bodies around us into recognizing their own right to belonging. So all of you is welcome here. This is not a pathologizing process. What does relational psyche mean? It means there are less spaces of individuality than we realize, and we are returning into the lens of self-viewing, which looks at the psyche as holding more than just our own conscious material. We look at our psyche as a garden, which includes the influences of many greater cycles and which have blurry membranes. So remember that any plasticity in this practice is watery, is cellulose, is like a tendril, tendons, collagen. And with energy, of course, with sound frequencies, as water, all change moves via osmosis. In psyche, you can also imagine it as influence. So association is a very important form of alchemy or state change to understand that's happening in consciousness, especially in collective consciousness, association. So kinship and contradiction is about sharing templates of mapping psyche as a process. And we're really aware of cultural and universal and relational wounds as portals. And we're looking at how these wounds as portals reach us through the personal levels of our energy field and also through the transpersonal, the collective, and the systemic. So sharing templates of mapping soul recognizing space, so depth space, means we have a soft aim of soul retrieval. First, a personal soul retrieval, and second, a collective soul retrieval. So soul retrieval is a process of remembering who and what we are, again as nature, and it also includes receiving back our soul parts from spirits. So these spirits who have become guardians of soul parts, which we will get into both later in this video and later in modules, but they are really, really important. So this work is based on elemental and ancestral spiritual abolition. And we share this as a process because process is the body of time and space. And the body of a reality, an encasement of consciousness of the present moment. So to collaborate with process, we allow the present moment to flow and we allow radical change and transformation as a feedback loop with that container. This is a distinctly relational way to work, a feminine way of creation, and is a distinctly rebalancing way to work within our current consciousness. Healing and expansion, life is nonlinear. So only supremacy or power over holds the idea of perfection as a fixed image, a goal to strive towards, and a height to reach. In this way, the kinship and contradiction container is a process-orientated constellation and does not focus or does not center on transcendence or attaining a stillness. So we're opening into the multiple, the chaotic, into understanding that change is the only constant and that God or source is change. We're also talking about wound as portals, because a wound is where compassion and empathy come through, and we can only meet each other as deeply as we have each met ourselves. So this is also about the resonance of our energy around those wounds. So wounds are the most supple spaces of transmutation that we have access to, and they are alive with actively generating the new. Wounds are where we find space in the psyche, where emotional power is alchemizing. Wounds are where spirits are. Wounds are where shadows are. So this practice wishes to assist us in making a discernment between what is reaching us through the personal, where we can allow some leniency in terms of the greater transpersonal movements, and where we can contextualize and better recognize the origins of dynamics when they come in from old grids. So the grids and the templates that we're letting go of. And spiritual abolitionism is really about making all of this as an inside job for the purpose of politically rooted anti-oppression. So abolishing slavery, and slavery is happening from many lenses. So the exiled empath, that part of us who is still overextending, who is still mutating around centrisms. Slavery is happening through relational dynamics where we honor someone else's or something else's view of reality over our own views, or when we are brainwashed, manipulated, gaslit by a collectively held reality. When entire sociocultures that we think are our own, especially as in whiteness, are actually colonial constructs and entirely made up of appropriated cultures, that's when spiritual abolitionism goes deep. We're functioning with a transformative justice and emergent pleasure activism to co-create a deep enough honeypot of joy and nourishment, which we all have access to, no matter our heritage, to be able to see where we are, our positioning, our context, and make a move in the direction which aligns our ethos. So kinship as a network generates its own compassionate power. So it's very important to have access to compassionate power and to get some tools to get to compassionate power. Otherwise, we're often just regurgitating the false power that we're reacting to, or living in the illusion of, like all of supremacy culture and all of power over is false power. It's not compassionate power. So balance of power as a felt sensation, as a tension, as a resource, as a reserve of life energy is a relational process of constant flowing transmutation and transformation. And balance is the central aim of right relation. So to learn about balance, take some time to connect with nature. How do the cycles of the seasons change? Where are they right now around you? How does day move into night? So in this balancing process, there's disappearances, appearances, and distances where contradiction must be present. And as soon as we have any kind of unity, we also include contradiction. So when we talk about kinship, we're discussing the points of interconnection, which are at least two sides of a relation, but ultimately it's more than that. It's not just a duality. This is a real multiplicity. So This practice is moving and being called into return not only through us, but also through something greater than us as individuals, and through something even greater than us as a collective of human beings. So we can see this through how ecology is always speaking to us through animals, climate change. This is also prophesied. So by prophecy, I mean to give the sacred a voice, or to have a mouthpiece for the intentions of the divine. So through systems aware or hyper object focused astrologers, for example, that as we move into the age of Aquarius, we move into a systems aware consciousness. We move towards something some are calling unity consciousness. Also, if we look at how we've been passing through a digital era, how simulation theory and computation was very important, and the birth of virtual realities are also precursors for this movement for us to understanding that reality itself, or the body of reality, a container, creates us as much as we create it. So the container of a reality is also the body of ritual. And this practice centers ritual because ritual is a space where we give up human-centric control, where we humble ourselves towards spirit, towards the numinous, towards what is greater. The ritual is sacred process. It also means opening up to a space which is undifferentiated outside of the control of the mind. So in these spaces, within these processes, are movements that which speak through contradictions. So we need to let the psychic level no longer be forced into a duality. So we're heading into a non-dual state through these practices. So altered states of reality are most definitely your doorway into non-dual states. Also dreaming, where we access perhaps a natural rebalancing through our dreaming. Psyche is also calling in this process of kinship. And I've been studying and receiving people's dreams since 2015, so 10 years now. And as the awareness about intersectionality and the emotional layers around us as psychic architectures, which govern access or which become barriers for different sensibility or beings, as this dialogue expands and becomes more common for us, especially through like dialogues with the psychic architecture of race, the psychic architecture of gender, we start to understand our divergences from the normative self-image that has been fixed or perhaps forced onto us through healing, like through living in cultures we live in. Through us healing all of the exiled aspects of who we are, who have not been included nor spoken to in the centric narrative, we start to understand the contradictions and the undifferentiated spaces behind all dualities. So it's those splits, which are also the deep splits in the collective energy body, which we start to bring in as the space from where we design the new template, or from where we look for where it's going to come from. Aha, this is where our greatest wisdom is. So getting in touch with something greater, no matter what it is for you, will be necessary for the container and for the compass. So it's often through radical dismemberment, so which is a precursor for transformation or part of a transformation process. So being spiritually pulled apart and rearranged, that we have access to something unchangeable and unbreakable. So for power, for a compass, for relativity, for the psyche, to be able to re-centralize when the old identity structures fall, for anchoring our sanity, for some kind of grounding, we need that larger container. So when we look at dismantling and the reckoning that is coming through the loss of the ideal, the loss of the supposed safety and comfort. All of this loss is loss of what is false, like a false altar, greed, individualism, and the expectation that we will not have to get wounded by relation, that life is fair. This generally shows up in our lives connected with failure, shame, severe disappointment, loss of direction, chronic illness, burnouts, and we need to be okay with weathering that and preparing even more for what we cannot yet fathom in terms of dismemberment. So when we look at like individual and collective dismantling, that reckoning and that loss is like kind of an upside down gift. So we need to be okay with knowing that we're going to be able to walk through that. And part of that is about accessing what is indestructible within us. So coming back to the point of why multidimensional kinship is generative power, because this is linked with the spirits and with ancestral wisdom. So the more of us who do this and the deeper we get into the practice with ourselves, what starts as a drip will become a waterfall. You know, it's like the collective wave of activism. It's pretty incredible once a critical mass is reached within us, within our connection to spirit, we tip something, and then it's often a wellspring on the other side. So Terence McKenna spoke about this, that behind fear is a feather bed. Once we digest all the emotional charge material, which is wrapped around spirits or archetypes in their exiled or shadowed forms, they do turn up as helping powers. So getting something out of the shadow is almost heavy work against the gravity of an orbit that has been set in motion for quite some time, especially one that is collectively held. And once you get free of this, or free the spirit from the locked associations around it, we suddenly get all these gifts. So access to new power, where when one body anchors a new resonance of liberation, the more kinship we have together, the more this reverberates through an entire network. Words become sparks and the puzzle pieces fall into place. When one of us remembers who we are, all of us remember. When we talk about kinship, we are not talking about one relationship between two beings. We are talking about the presence of non-being. So the space between all things, the mediator. Much like a gut, it is a passage of mediation and exchange, and there is no being, no object, only multi-perspective. So kinship is all about alignment. It is when something is in resonance and in solidarity or agreement for the underlying shared goal of a bound liberation. And bound liberation means that we have recognized something inside of us belongs to the oppressed other. And if, when we are willing to listen and speak up for the parts of ourselves that embody the other's voice within us, if we have met the inclusive, infinite body of other inside of us, our collective liberation can be worked with. Our ability to really listen to another depends on how much deprogramming we have made. The deprogramming is about a shedding of the layers of how we see, interact, and care for these inner others. So bound liberation is relative, informed, and powered by our positionality, personal identity, and essential identity. So these are also layers of our energy field, layers which are in collaboration and kinships of their own. When we touch on parts of us that host space for the inclusive infinite body of the other inside of us, deprogramming can be made. So I'm looking now at the next page, contradiction as soul retrieval process of solidarity. So when our cultural narratives and self-images lost their interconnectedness with the cycles of nature, it became very easy for us to build up prejudice and belief systems against recognizing contradiction as valuable. Through lineages of that built-up emotional coding, this accumulates in barriers in resonance. So these barriers can become as big as realities. This is because the soul realm is full of contradiction, and because in the soul realm we're discussing what is past the shadow, so has already entered the non-dual. So through hierarchy, speed and forgetting, which is also the way that our coping in society is forced, hierarchy, speed, and forgetting, we also jump over recognizing the contradictory relation as holding of spirit and soul. So first of all, as soon as contradiction comes up, you have to remember that, aha, I am touching something from my soul right now, some kind of nutrients. So wherever we withhold the knowing from ourselves that we are nature, so everywhere we withhold love, where we have a good or a bad binary, this is where soul loss is happening for us. It's within the splits of binaries. Those splits of binaries become through lineage, personalities, and family traits, or patterns of a family dynamic, or abusive patterns. When these splits of the binaries are collectively held, they become societies, like, tendencies of a culture, or violences of a culture. And over time, they build up as whole cultures. As big as realities, these grow, and the whole Western lens is actually built from a splitting of the rejection of soul within all things, which has connection to the rejection of the feminine, which has connection to the rejection of the darkness, which has connection to the rejection of chaos as of change, of freedom, the rejection that all things are interconnected. And this has mostly been instrumentalized through religion, leaning into rationality and away from divining or intuitive models of agency, where all agential beings are understood as relating with experience and worldview, and have a feedback loop about that. So, which is really more, yeah, maybe more of a matrilineal, not as a patriarchal structure. Especially something which includes holding and water and tenderness at the center of it, and receptivity. So the deep soul of all being is embedded within relation and within our interconnectedness. And hierarchy and power over, which operates on binary and collectively held exclusion tactics to reinforce that binary, do not allow value in contradiction and therefore are not able to contain the soul and are violent to the soul. So recognizing the contradiction is the spirit realm trying to speak is a first step in welcoming back our capacity as beings of real co-creation of new worlds. Through the shadow, the spiritual is trying to speak. Because through the shadow, we meet our projection of otherness, and we will only find the unity, like our essence, which we journey through otherness and include our otherness in the understanding of our own wholeness, by kind of being able to handle the contradiction. So as the spiritual aspect of all things, so if we're talking about the essential, is a container supporting the soul of all. In a world where contradiction is not recognized as spirit, our soul is not always anchored. Through intergenerational experiences of trauma and being unseen, parts of our soul are split off and banished also, and without communication, without communion, and without recognized relation, the spiritual forces subvert and display as monsters. So they're shadow forms. So soul is always there, but when it is not seen, held, and resonated with, it goes into the accompaniment of spirit, and our reality gets very dry, rigid, and locked. We cannot self-source. Power is only an illusion, a display of an ideal that needs to exert something over something else. Relational power is immanent within a thing, luminous, life-giving, radiant. When there is only dehydration and dryness, water is extracted. So emotional resource is extracted. The vibration of these kind of realms is loose and out of harmonic rhythm. and harming spirit can pass through. So cannibalistic, self-serving, greedy spirits, or like virus style of spiritual energy. So soul loss is a loss of life energy, a loss of the fruit of your inner being, a loss of radiance. Soul loss is a tactic perpetuated to enforce power over. And when our connection to soul is broken, we become slaves to something else because we lose our vocational drive. So we lose resonance, we lose power, which makes our heartbeat strong. And if the heart is the real creator, like our heartbeat resonates like over 9 feet around our body. If that's the real creator through vibration, when soul loss happens, we can't create. So at the crux of the soul loss is a socio-cultural and structural issue. So our collective has suffered huge soul loss, instrumentalized by the use of power over religion and governing systems to control through belief and binaries, shame, guilt, wrongness, connected to a hyper-individualized and disembodied self. So having access to your own soul is allowing you agency. It is a liberated state of being. It makes it easier for you to grow, expand, journey. You have more inner resilience, flexibility, access to creativity, more capacity to hold contradiction, and you will have more impact. Soul is retrieved through recognition. It is retrieved when enough relational space to hold it appears, and it is received back from the spirit realm. You can feel it in the sensorial body, which environments have space for soul and which don't. In environments where shame is present and utilized as a weapon, the weave is loose and soul is likely with the spirits, who are also unrecognized and in their monster form. So spirits or archetypes go into their monster forms when they are pushed into shadow states, both personally and collectively. This is a little bit different for folks who have experienced complex trauma because likely the sensorial body will be hyper aware, but we will get into that in modules, in future modules. So all of what I'm creating is complex trauma aware and organized to support the development of compassion and inner distances for a parts orientated inner multiplicity. So this is also especially for queer and black and brown bodies. So next page. Pre-seed intervisioning. A first opening here in this booklet is to actually start visioning into what kinship is. What would kinship actually look like? How might people relate with each other? How would the economy work? How would we mediate law, morals, and ethics or disagreements? These questions seem to want to rush to jump to solutions. What's actually coming up for you in that space? We might feel a sense of dissociation and overwhelm when we start to search for answers on a collective and earth-wide scale if it's only from the mind. A blank space surrounding some kind of far-off, blurry island. Perhaps we see the visionary goal images clearly, but what about the pathway to get there? And how are our bodies in this moment? What we come up against in this space might be hopelessness, limit. We might understand how limited the individual mind is. And if we go off into that blurry island and create a new psychic template, which could definitely work for some time, will it be exclusionary to all the beings which exist, or will it be inclusive? If it's to be fully inclusive, we can't jump away from what is or negate anyone's experience. So to jump off into that blurry island, I would call this a psychic retreat. Which is important. So we can understand that the escape through the vision is important, but that any psychic retreat we rest into, we will also need to dissolve at some point. So all the projections will fall on this path. So we understand that what we vision is in dialogue with our deprogramming, and we do not just vision, we understand our position. We always understand our shadows, our blind spots, and the fact that, like, we don't know what we don't know. So my feeling about kinship is that we need to grow the real embodied wisdom to weave that path through just consistency. And I feel like a lot of that is about grace and developing more vertical psychic space, and to be able to embody certain forms of knowing. So to basically be able to embody the level of contradiction which the pre-vision of kinship needs. So maybe kinship is something which spreads outwards or links outwards, but it also goes to the depth and it goes to the heights and it also reaches to other dimensions, or maybe it comes from other dimensions. Or is it also connected to a realm which we exist within? Does it generate its own resonance? In order for us, like, to start, it could be helpful to vision a great tree. Like, how does a great tree reach up towards the light? We need to first grow roots, tend to what is broken within the roots. So this sigil, there is no right or wrong way. It's just about you locating yourself, like a fingerprint, like an impression. It could be an eye, it could be a root system, it could be a leaf, it could be a tree, it could be a bird. You know, like, it could also change, like your symbol of kinship can be remade anew in every moment. You know, it could be a spiral that shows up here. It could be a wound. We're going to talk a lot about divination here. So visioning and seeing. Divination is really about reading and then entering into a co-creation with what we are reading. So here we come back to wishes and intentions. So a non-attached wish, one where you do not need to take control over the process and jump forward into a product because it's not all resting on your shoulders. Perhaps this is about wishing for a seed. So embodied wisdom and the edges of the new, like the new, the unreal, the yet to be imagined, would be felt somatic experiences of active wound portals. So right on the growth edges. So we draw a sigil, a symbol to locate a pathway, to call in a pathway. So this sigil calls the spirits in. I would suggest this page to do with a drum journey. So to enter into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, to ask the spirits for your symbol of kinship, and then to come back and draw it, or to draw it while you're in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. And to redo it if you feel, you know, for whenever you feel like you need, when you've gone past your current template and you're going into another template, draw it again. Let it be your compass. So I've gone into a teeny tiny note about spiritual abolitionism as a practice that recognizes all of our past, also near past, present, and likely future systems of slavery and incarceration, including the slavery of the empathic and mutable bodies inside all being in relation. So this practice is extremely deep and will go alongside a lot of like awakenings about how the systems that we live in are all formed around slavery. And I guess it's so necessary to have this as a spiritual practice inside of you in order to keep moving through those awakenings and to not to not to get pulled down into them too much. So spiritual abolitionisms are liberation practices which have the capacity to entirely transform punitive paradigms. So we're talking here about moving into a completely different paradigm, which if a critical mass reach like a level of consciousness, like perhaps the way we experience our reality would shift. So this path is primarily made through reparations, through forgiveness and release. So forgiveness is a really huge centric, like a self-forgiveness is in the middle of this. If you are forgetting that abundance and balance exist, look to spiritual ecology, look to the cherry tree, reminding us that abundance and overflow and mutuality, communion does exist. Look at all the excess cherries from a cherry tree and how they form nutrients for the soil, and how the compost is a precursor to the nutrients for the seed. Look at how the seed bursts through its shell. Look at how the seed goes down, grows roots, finds water before it comes up. Look at how the flower follows the sun. Look at how the trees receive and interact with the wind and the air. Look at how the photosynthesis happens. This is all operating with communion, with a gift culture, and that communion and gift culture has to start inside yourself, from yourself. So transmutation of shadow contracts is the most important step for spiritual abolitionism. When it is coupled with then tuning into the suffering of the collective and sending attention to re-centralize the needs of the most oppressed parts within and without. So we know that visioning into kinship and returning into right relation will take longer than our lifetimes. So this scale of deprogramming could take something like 9 generations. So we're starting just where we're at, with the goals of gathering wisdom and unlocking as many shadow contracts as possible for ourselves. Maybe there'll be some bridging of intergenerational gaps. Maybe there'll be some bridging of simple gaps and holes in neighborhood and community. So especially would like to discuss repair and recognition and kinship not as something which jumps into a place of bypass. So within the spiritual realm, repair is about recognition, naming, seeing, listening, and affirming the truth of what is. So of what is really severed, broken, misrecognized, or what has been stolen. Repair is also about reweaving a more stable, resilient, and nourishing emotional cord between all things, including between our own wounds and our own experiences with shame, with abandonment and neglect, So we're all connected to recreate the relational structures we've inherited and been preconditioned in. So the nourishment does not mean buffering the suffering of others or suffering for them. So when they need to go through something themselves, every being deserves their own right to their own suffering, as long as they also have access to the tools which will enable the initiation and the transformation that they need. So we're all conditioned to recreate the patterns of wounding in our own inheritance, because trauma is running on grooves coded into energy. Energy codes behavior, body, how we hold emotions in our bodies. This preconditioning and inheritance comes through our society's lenses and naturally falls into the same repatternings and pre-existing energetic algorithms of extraction, erasure, and dominance. So I guess those ones are really particular and special to be aware of. Like, how are you bridging your preconditioned traumatic inheritance in a way that you're not directly repatterning pre-existing algorithms of extraction, erasure, and dominance? So deprogramming some of these codes will feel like loss. It will feel like taking a really big hit, you know? It might feel like humiliation, especially if your pride or self-protection is in your shadow, which is a lot for folks who have not been centralized in society. A lot of us have been shamed, and the blending with the shame means pride and self-protection comes in. So the bravado or arrogance might be necessary for us to survive, but we will all need to drop it through the shadow and welcome what is on the other side. So what is on the other side is humility and an inner strength which does not require external recognition. So I'm also on this path too, and it is the kind of path which stretches us beyond what we believe to be possible for ourselves. So what about reparation in our energy, also with the respect of psychic boundaries? This is really important to understand psychic boundaries, especially for empathy, which by nature is a relational, emotional, receptive space. So by its nature, it defies boundary. This is why we talk about non-interventional reparation. So non-interventional reparation was something I found referenced in a book called Reconsidering Reparations, where the writer Olufemi Otewo discusses a necessary start to planetary politics and pinpoints that actually what we are talking about as forgetting is actually an obfuscation by the imperial and colonial state. So the forgetting is not a fault. It was manufactured, and it is a wounding. It is a disillusionment. So when we enter into reparation, this is not a policy. This is transformation. This is not just like mind transformation. This is social transformation. So being a interventionalist is part of the problem, especially being a European or colonial interventionalist, because there's so much assumed dominance in that. So how to not be an interventional in how we vision kinship, how to hold back from our own gaze as dominant, as enforcing, and as controlling. So this is important. We must let beings be autonomous around us. So again, your own gaze is the most important tool to self-check and gaze as it is happening around me. There is no template for depth, knowing, or relation. I feel it. I am cut off by assumptions of my individual nature. My multidimensionality is not held in many places, and I must be very specific about where I receive being seen as truth. So boundaries can be a form of non-hyper-individual and non-interventional reparative relation. But even to navigate your boundaries in a relational place, we need to afford space for position and context. So that means we need a lot of tenderness and grace, especially around our own inner victim. So we need resources. Emotional resources will need to be put towards being able to recognize the subjective truths of the other who exists within us. So that other is the one who we are attempting to remain openly curious towards as we aim to be in solidarity with and to speak for in the case of their victimization or oppression. But when they are seen as an inner other, we know that when they are oppressed, we are oppressed. When we fully claim all others as existing inside of us, we can speak for their experience at no personal cost to ourselves or to our own self-image. So that is alliance. At no personal ego boost to ourselves or boost to our own self-image or status. This is made as a self-care. So that's why we need to come back to this as a vocation, as a service that we need to do in order to live, our ethos, and for our collective return into balance. So there's a beautiful line by Jaya Jun. Your boundary need not always be an electric fence that shocks those who touch it. It can be a consistent light around you that announces, I will be treated sacredly. And we're going to talk about this consistent light around you as your sacred reminder to others, from the lens of working down, like kind of through our relational maps until we find codes of mutual liberation, and then are able to like offer kind of keys and unlocking. We're able to offer fruits in order to say what we need and to be able to communicate boundaries that like allow us to get what we need and also allow the other to get what they need or to be spoken for. So the internal steps of a non-interventional reparation are about centering our energetic hooks around self-image, what has the capacity to boost us and what has the capacity to demolish us. So both need to be mediated. And the internal steps of a non-interventional reparation are about centering our energetic hooks around our blockages to receiving love. And yes, this is receiving. So even through negative emotions and even through rage, when we withhold love from ourselves, we are blocked. We are in lockdown and we do not honor our own soul in that moment. We cannot give love through our own radiance because we cut ourselves away from love. So our hooks are also around our blockages to giving love, sure, but first, because collective liberation is that inside job, we must dissolve barriers that exist within us to receiving forgiveness and receiving tenderness from Great Spirit, from Source, from nature, from all things, and from all relations. So before asking for it to come from humans, and before attempting to give from an empty inner soul cup, we need to be able to see that everything that is coming towards us, it is love, and we need to be able to receive it as that. So as nutrients for fortification, of the wound as a portal, even the hard messages, they are all teachers, they are all asks. Some we might say no to, and rightly so, but we see them as asks, not as anything that has the capacity to damage or break a deep inner aspect within us, our essence. Our essence remains unchanged, unaffected. We protect and we contain our own soul. The external step of a non-interventional reparation has something to do with speaking up and being able to carry out the narrative of the oppressed, who we speak for, through our own inner object of that being. So what we are speaking up about is also not necessarily rebuttal nor war vibe. It's about release, about recognition, a redistribution of attention, and a resourcing of new centralization. So, for example, a way I could do this is feel the voice of the other within me and own it. And I am able to speak for their pain and protect their right to grieve. And I do not see it as an attack on another part of me or another inner object. And when there is an attack happening, I go in further inwards to look at what energy is in exchange, which inner soils are touching transformation. And then I also have a choice in that deep space how to co-create. So, coming into the point of this book, constellating. We've heard this term most certainly through astrology. And if we think about it, the planets are embodied beings with a resonance and a frequency, as are all other passing phenomena and all agental beings, because behind everything are archetypes, which are the building blocks for consciousness. So the metaphysical and spirit, everything we experience as spiritual, are building blocks for what we encounter and how we encounter. All of nature, of course, also, or all animals. With planets, we can trust the resonance and frequency is always a constant, and this is what makes astrology such a powerful divinatory tool, its reliability as a mirror for our current situation, as we have so many perspectives of genius, to acquire this collective wisdom in how we read these constellations. So all oracle systems are such mirrors. Every oracle card deck is such a mirror. When the oracle card decks are created, we need to always understand from which lens they are created. So in regards to how much of our reality and multiplicities they're able to hold. So looking at a whole system is important. What is it able to recognize? Is it putting everything back on the individual, or does it take into account the fixed and collectively held dynamics of power which are channeled through the collective unconscious? So archetypes we work with, for example, the archetypes of the tarot, are also showing up with a consistent resonance and frequency for a collective, because the tarot has evolved alongside consciousness for an extended period of time. When we use the tarot as a tool, this is about our associations to and with each archetype. So how we move through them and how we co-create with them is also in relation to how we see them. So the archetypes themselves change when our perspective and understanding of them changes. So psyche is a mass populated with energy, and that acts through characteristics and spiritual embodiments, which we experience as psychic images. A psychic image means an imprint. As gaze is so much more than just a visual, it's perception. So it's an encoding. It is data encoded into a relational fabric, which is also held in soma, in the body and in materiality, which is also the yin principle, how yin is expressed, which I've already mentioned, but which I'm going to be repeating a lot. This is also the return. One psychic image soaks through infinite personal and collectively held associations to become colored by these associations. So we are discussing tints of perception and how these tints of perception guide our energy signatures about what kind of resonance we are emitting. So if I'm going to talk a little bit more about image here, remember, in relation, we are consciousness experiencing itself. So this whole net is held together. Our self-awareness only arises because we are within this mutual moment of experiencing each other. And that's kind of going into like the quantum relation there. Our self-awareness only arises because we are within this mutual moment of experiencing each other. The space between us, the smoky mirror, or the illusion of separation is a bubbling chaos pot, also where God or source is, as God is change. So through this image is wholeness. When we fall in love through our own image of God, recognizing wholeness of self in the other. And what we fall in love with, of course, includes the shadow, is outside of the binary of the good or bad, is nutrients for that bridge over that split. The soul throws images out through experience, through path, in dreaming, and through the world oracle. So we experience as, through our ego as a separate being, we step through. So a healthy ego container keeps us always in balance to the collective conscious and the unconscious and the objective psyche. Objective psyche is like source. Exactly the nutrients the psyche needs, so the container the ego needs, and the personal area of the psyche needs to assist our personality, to assist our selfhood, and to balance that healthy ego, to balance our existence and our survival in this sociocultural environment, show up for us. We can use a tool, for example, self-portraiture, in a very similar way to mediate this transformative power of gaining our own agency to expand and create or relate within the multiple archetypes passing through or inhabiting us. So, on initiation, remember we are living in societies and culture without initiation, and we all need initiation. The soul needs initiation. We need faith. We need contact to greater cycles of life and death. Death is within every present moment as change is constant. So we are here preparing to die consciously and to transform within every present moment. When we go through initiation, the images the soul throws out, mingled or perhaps led by a divine force or objective psyche or source, break apart old rigidities of the encasing of the ego, old rigidities of the personality, old rigidities of selfhood structure. And this is a necessary dismemberment for spiritual growth and for actualizing our power. This is a necessary dismemberment for claiming your right to be who you are. And most definitely in the breaking apart of this old rigidity, there will be power expressed as emotion, which needs to be alchemized. So maps, creating our own maps to constellate this is a way that we navigate. Art making is a way that we navigate. Altered state journey is a way we can navigate through this. But art making is to exist in an altered state. Imagination, visioning, and the creation of something that did not previously exist. So what makes art art is that it is able to hold contradiction. There is something holy or sacred which exists within it, which can't be reduced or which can't be replicated. A painting or a scribble doesn't solve, it expands and it allows. Or it doesn't solve in a reductive way, it solves in an expansive way. It allows us to exist within it without pulling us apart, without pinning us down, and without scrutinizing us. It allows the soul of a thing to be. So this constellation is also not about pinning things down and scrutinizing, which really is a part of the deconditioning we are doing with how we journal, with how we think, with how we view ourselves and others, and the textures of our gaze. So empathy. Empathy is actually about creation. and sharing that creation with the world. It is about relational world building. Our empathy center is not a sponge. It's not a dustbin for the unwanted feelings, shadows of others. Empathy is our superpower, as we are channels mediating through our dual awareness. Intersectionality, neurodiversity, and the altered states of awareness are multiplicities or inner dynamics of our responses to trauma, so CPTSD, or how parts communicate internally, offers us a unique awareness of the material worlds, unique wisdoms, and unique nuances. And through these decentralizations, there is a unique awareness or exchange happening with the metaphysical, with the sensing capacities of the body. This is not to say that trauma makes sense, but it is. It has happened. And through the fact that it has happened, we can access so much more data than we would have had access to if we were positioned in a central and non-affected positioning to which our socio-cultural bias caters to and allows to stay sleeping. So we have been woken up and we will not be going back to sleep. We will keep being woken up. As long as inner reparative spirit keeps speaking, the wounds will keep calling and guiding you. So we need to start having a really deep understanding of where we are and where we are going. Understanding oneself as a channel leads us also to understanding an intergenerational and ancestrally activated level of transmutation. So you have a choice. In order to have any agency and call our power to us, to activate free will, to liberate our empathy into the direction of creativity, and to be a part of co-dreaming the realities we need into being, because this is what collective liberation will take. We need full access to our soul, full access to joy, full access to all emotions as potency, not as wrong. And we need to really release the lens onto us that anything we are picking up on is purely individual. We must start honoring our unique access to data as a gift to inform us about how to world build, where to world build, with who to world build, and where and with who not to world build. That's important. Where and with who not to world build. So coming back to boundaries, this constellation practice is really about self-centralizing, coming back into your own lane, pulling our attention back into our own energy field, taking ownership about what we are in relation with, looking at why from the perspective of our own needs and our own liberation codes, and looking at maybe some of those relations as also where we're receiving forgiveness. So constellating our psychic relations is important because we are able to locate our position and our context. So ultimately that's about self-witness. We are able to locate pockets of dormant shadow power, which is often trapping our attention, snagging emotion, holding us back from courageous evolutionary action. Imagine that we are pivoting from an old centric altar to a new altar. And in the process of this pivot, the new altar becomes more and more deeply detailed, and more of us join into the powering of this altar and receiving its glow. So by constellating within a shared vision, we can better see where we are at. Once we know where we are, the way towards what needs to be transmuted, i.e. dissolved, and what needs to be protected or fostered, i.e. crystallized, woven, or empowered, becomes clearer. Constellation is also a tool for self-empowering your intuition, is also vital for intersectional shadow relations. And when the world misunderstands us, we work on understanding ourselves, slowly bringing what is not accompanied in the darkness into our sphere of accompaniment. So we start with the phrase, attention is love. What does that really mean, attention is love? This is about magnetism and attraction. So coming back to the laws of attraction, within energy, everything attracts its balancer. So opposites attract, or like attracts like, or rather interact. So if you're in the shadow of the empath, if you're in the shadow of care, there will be boundary erasure, like there will be invasion of boundaries, there will be narcissism, there will be gaslight, there will be manipulation. Relations bind two sides of something together. Think of a relation like a frequency, a symphony of frequencies emitting from your being and received into your being. So when we see patterns in how we relate or in attachment styles, and patterns in what kind of partnerships are occurring and reoccurring transgenerationally, and when we work with attention, the points of attention, the multi-points of attention, we always start with where we're at. Where is your attention going? Where is it being called or grabbed? Where is it snagged? Where is it consistently getting snagged? We are not looking at how deeply it's going into the other at this point in time, just where. If you can't tell, or if you are extremely burnt out, or in shutdown mode or overstimulated, try not to rely on the mind or on rationality. Get out of the mind entirely, and you can also sketch or scribble and start with the textures or shapes of your attention, or the textures and shapes of your emotional body. So let the sketch receive and offload some relational cluster or gridlock charge. Perhaps you need to start with just drawing or scribbling, following intuition, and stay connected with the feeling of the body. So for those who are not in shutdown or overwhelm and have some mental resource at the moment, where is your attention going? So I'm going to come over onto the grid. So we're only looking at one side of this at one time. And obviously, my examples could seem a bit overwhelming here because you're looking at it like finished. You're not seeing it made in process, but you would start just with one relation at one time. So start by plotting a few of the places where your attention is going. Perhaps you're aware from where they're coming from your body. Is it going to a relationship or a person? Is it a family member? Is it all going into fears of the future? Is it picking up on relational dynamics? Are there some to-dos? Are there past narratives? Did you have a dream where there's dialogue happening? Start simple. It's important to start to depict a relational chord, like from which part of the body does it come from? Or is it even passing through your body? Perhaps there's something in the dreaming which is directly in relation with the outside world or the system we live in. For example, stress dreams or nightmares, which are a direct response to an official appointment or a government letter. Draw the relational chords as passing through you if needed. So looking at our attention, is it split into 1,000 bodies? Is it 3 to 5 views, or is it one body? The loci of attention, so the flame of your attention, is where power and the power of formation and transmutation is, because witness, I guess, that's where your connection to the witness is. So in meditation and in some psychic energy practitioner, the loci of attention, like the flame of attention, is your most powerful tool. This is where we get simplicity and clarity and inner distance, because most of the time we lose access to our powers when we are fused accidentally, like especially intuitional bodies. We can very easily be fused all the time. We need that distancing practice. We only want to be fused or merged with states of being or certain powers by choice. Practicing with visioning, divination, or purification, for example, where flame of attention is really important, would be something like violet flame Reiki. So attention is love, because at the very locus of attention, or the flame of attention, is where distance collapses. It's the meeting point of the world, other, and focus of our gaze. So the alchemy between inside and outside worlds happens at this point. Think of it as a bubbling cauldron, and your attention underneath is the flame. If we imagine that the fusion is what is happening inside the bubbling cauldron, total love is to have the self totally dissolved and to enter into unity within that. So sometimes you want to be outside of the cauldron and have the cauldron as a tool. Sometimes you don't want to be inside it. When we assume that we can exist inside the cauldron and that we can collapse all things into unity and love, this is where bypass happens. Because in the human state, we will always have blind spots, and we'll always have nuance, and we'll always have difference. Relation as we experience life will not be solved. Death is the solving of the problem and the chaos of relation and of difference. So for the sensorial body and intuition, the loci of attention is felt as a body and is connected to our somatics. So also, as we can feel or sense the resonance of a reality felt as a body, most of our data comes through this form of hypersensing. We can feel the resonance in our stomachs also of attention. So when attention and body is pulled into realms without our consent or without our conscious decision, a body can feel dissociated. This happens on triggers because, like, the inherited algorithmic track of triggers has so much force in it that often we're not able to anchor without it jumping. So I call that the wobble. So it is an aspect of being mutable, empathic, and of being intersectionalized, having had aspects of who we are exiled by or not included in the collective map, not centralized or co-opted, which also means these parts have inadvertently experienced a continual gaslighting from the collective. These exiled parts are likely animal powers, earthy beings, pieces of our soul. These ones will be jumping on triggers. As we re-centralize these aspects and view our capacity for mutability as a gift, in being able to journey and practice multi-perspectives, which we will do in future modules. This is how the sensorial body can open as a tool. A perspective shift becomes a world changer because you get more agency on being the one in control of that perspective shift. So intersectionalized bodies have a predetermined skill here. You have more access to more multi-perspective. And I mean, I'm saying gift. I know it's also a burden because it means more splits, but we're looking at it here as a gift and resiliency, basically, and flexibility. Generations who have lived within the digital realm have more ease of multiplicity, more distance, more awareness about resonant realities, I guess, because the digital realm is a reality body capable of holding fragmentation, capable of relating with us. I mean, it causes a lot of fragmentation as well, but it also just mirrors to us fragmentations within us which we didn't realize were there. And to me, it's a bit of like a processual incubator, and it's large enough to hold splits and fissures. So through this kind of constellation practice, which is similar to what IFS does, we are also recognizing ancestral messages, dreaming, synchronicities from spirit. Spiritual guidance is about mapping and seeing this. So your guides are the important ones. I'm not your guru. And opening up more space into our own inner world, being able to then go deeper into which elemental energy is in resonance for us. So our inner world is much, much larger and much more important than we realize, much more influential into everything we are in relation with than we realize. And through this constellation, we are delving into relational dynamics to seek the images underneath. So through the projections, through materiality, through psychic image, going deep into elemental energy, we could see this as going deep enough to get in touch with the essential or the essence of a situation. So before I start, I usually make this practice on a blank page. And I don't have any rules or regulations other than to redo the practice flow and to seek depth or to seek the essential and to look at the contradictions. So the only way is your way. Importantly about this practice, your lineage and your ancestors and your connection to spirit and your energy is the teacher. I am not your guru. I am on the same path as you in my own way, and beginning where we are at is exactly where you need to be. So step 2 on this is to redo the exact same map, but to drop out any non-essential, anything that's like too connected to the other person's inner world and not informing you about your world. So we're also looking at what is the attention in or onto me. So how is the attention coming in as love? How can I receive it as love? Which lens do I need to be able to see through so I can understand how that treatment of me is an attempt for the other to get love? Or if I pull that back into my realm, how does this equate with where I'm at in regards to how I'm used to receiving love? What do I believe I am worth? And even deeper, once we realize how intertwined our vocation is in our shadows, we can also see the attention coming in or onto me as our main spiritual teaching, as the nutrients for our paradigm shift. After being able to understand and hold space for our own traumatized parts. So this is a bit of what leveling might mean. Once we're aware of our trauma constellation, we can exit the entire paradigm, walk away from the endless knot. What those parts, like once the parts have enough glue of contradictions between them to hold them together, we can arrive into a new level where we are not as hooked into the spaces of unconsciousness and constant tyranny of gaps and binaries. We can walk into a space of yes and I am wounded, yes and I am liberated. So the attention or gaze coming onto or into us is important for any unique aspects of us which have not been centralized, any multidimensionalities, neurodiversities, queerness, brown or blackness, intersectionalized or exiled parts of us, which do exist within everyone. So this is important for Black feminist shadow work. We do get to a certain point in shadow work where we say, the gaze coming onto me and into me is a lie. I have been wounded by this to the extent that I need. I have gathered enough data now. I have learnt what I needed. This stage is reached when we allow ourselves to move through feeling, when we find acceptance of feeling, when we can surrender and allow ourselves to actually feel a situation, hold it with a consistent, non-weaponized self in the cells of your body, and that is to hold it with a deep knowing. So we must know ourselves at our depths. We must confront our own capacity for violence, know what is in our nature and what is not in our nature. This is also the protection from gaslighting, to know yourself. And this is the resonance that we put out into the world. We show up as our resonance. Continue, continue, continue. Show up as your resonance. We might wobble in moments, and that's okay, because this is a cycle of return. So irrespective of what tide is happening out there in the world, we show up as our resonance. So keep doing, step 3 page of the constellation is to keep doing the depth practice and to keep letting go of information which isn't required for you anymore. To look at the clusters. And now we're getting into looking at like knowing our depth. So what clusters are you sitting on? Is it non-recognition? Is it a particular paradigm of flight, fight, fawn, please, appease? Is it a boundary issue? Perhaps the cluster is about self-value. Perhaps a cluster is being snagged with a particular emotion. Clusters hold the deeper messages. Clusters have something to do with karma, really about your vocation, your spiritual vocation, like what your life's work is here to mediate with. And I don't mean career or your job. When I say vocation, I'm talking about your path to becoming an elder, your medicine, because we're all here to alchemize unique medicine. And then that's what we emit in relation, our unique medicine. So the clusters are asking you to witness something. And perhaps that witnessing will be about being allowed to experience, to feel rage, like to feel whatever you need to feel frustration, to feel the end of things, to feel limit. On page 4, I've suggested to look for balance, look for rerouting, look for elemental energy. How can you bring balance into this constellation right now? Is it that you need water somewhere? If you cannot find water in your personal realm, put it on your altar. Make sure you're drinking enough water. Bless your water before you drink it. So coming back to the flame of attention, I want to talk about the capacity of self-policing. because we're talking a lot about exiled parts, and we're talking a lot about deprogramming. And of course, when there are exiled parts, there are also dominating parts. And when we're working with attention, we really need to be aware about the quality of that attention, from which part the attention's coming from. So does it burn or does it illuminate? Living with the white, supreme, patriarchal, and colonial panopticon means having had to self-police. Because if we did not self-police, it would have meant total exclusion, abandonment, and death. So what are we self-policing? Which inner parts? Is that self-policing? Is it like, would that have been carried out by our attention? It would have been carried out by a split flame of attention, a split loci of attention, which is probably somewhere in the mind or looking down on us. So inside of us, there is a splitting, perhaps also dialogues or inner eyes outside our bodies looking in on us all the time, and that scrutiny and pressure causes intuitional energy to scatter. So our intuitional energy needs a safe inner container. So this constellation, where is my attention coming from? Is it all coming from my forehead and mental realm? This round format of the constellating is also only a suggestion. You might not even be showing up in the middle. You might be on the edge of the map. There are some relational energies here which are more abstract, intellectual, and others which I've drawn in which are more embodied. So all healing here is self-recognition, and all recognition is self-recognition. Actually, the way that relational energy works is that the inside job of it all means when we recognize something in another, we likely have a few layers there. So the judgment coming from others might be about past experiences which inform us of our boundaries in terms of what we need, in terms of which resonances we need to call in. Maybe what's on this constellation is showing us what kind of love we deserve and what we dare to ask for. So I want to talk to you a little bit about pivoting as well here. If we made a practice to see through the eyes of the heart, would the image of the relation or the texture of the relation change? How much are you in your heart or your stomach? So through this process, we might see that the positioning or prioritizing of relation might be changing. Some relations which were embedded in the material plane might be moving into a metaphysical death or a slumber space, as I like to call it. Some relations need to be submerged under the psychic waters for a while. You might see the need to do a ritual around this, like submerge something in water on your altar, make a fire ritual, bring some rocks to your altar. How can you honor and co-carry or welcome in some of the unwitnessed elemental energy that is present without judgment, without making it wrong or right? How can you tend to what is here in your constellation? Especially when there becomes an entanglement about whose trauma is it, or discussions where one side of the relation is not ready or able to recognize privilege or move past fear, guilt, shame, or spiritual bypassing. Relation always exists even in no contact, because all time is now, and memory and dreaming are all now. So we could maybe also, if we're working with the systemic layers or the socio-cultural layers of this orb, We could also be seeing how collective shadow is touching us. Which parts could we use as a catapult for other areas of our life? For example, if I have fire activated in one area, if I'm angry, if I feel rage, how can I direct that as courageous energy into another area of the psyche where I could use fire, Like, how can I put that towards self-advocation? For example, if I have quite a lot of water, emotional receptivity in a certain area, if I'm caring for others or listening and responding to others emotionally, empathically, what about the relationship with myself? How can I bring some of that water in to look at some of the other clusters, or to water some of the other clusters? So I mentioned liberation codes earlier. And of course, this is just such a longer, this is just a longer dialogue. But the liberation code underneath is usually something mutually beneficial by accident, by honoring yourself. And again, I remind you here that fulfilling your wishes is a joy for all of us, and the flow of everything. Everyone benefits around you on a soul level from your wishes being fulfilled when they are deep enough to transmute emotional hooks, resistances, old stories and activation, and actually be access freedom codes. Like if they're unlocking old curses or conditionings around you in your lineage, everybody benefits from this. Remember, things operate on karmic cycles too. You are not only meeting these energies in this lifetime. Some relations will not reach total transmutation in this lifetime, but you can release your own hooks and get to a place of forgiveness, to release oneself from holding or allowing anyone else's energy or actions to be governing or controlling how we are feeling. It costs us a lot to hold anything unforgiven. To hate costs us a lot. To hold a grudge costs us a lot. So much energy, so much suffering. We release others in order to free ourselves. So, talking about divinations and oracles, constellating is really about divination. So we're learning to see what are the energies that are coming up, from where are they coming? Are they synchronicities from the world as an oracle? Are they from the dreaming? How are we experiencing them? How are these energies manifesting? And how they're meeting us depends on our level of consciousness. Whether we can see them or not depends on our level of consciousness and our capacity for nuance. It depends on how much contradiction we can hold, on how much capacity for emotional charge we can hold. It depends what can be met in ourselves. Like, it depends what makes sense to us to feel, like how deeply we have met ourselves. The more depth in which you have met yourself, the more depth and power and contradiction will come to you. So you will need to become the bridge. And that bridge sometimes is traversing the impossible. So in order to traverse the impossible, you must have a connection with something unbreakable. So something that is spiritually fortified within you. Everything is connected. What's coming to us and how we see always has a message. Energies mirror to us, energy unfolding on the earth and consciousness is always through our own lens. So through the lens and the capacity that we have access to. So we are called to co-create through how we see, through what we have access to, which shapes what is manifested. So yes, you matter. And yes, we need you to be experiencing and deepening your level of consciousness. And yes, we need you to be full of soul power. We need you in full agency as a co-creator. Every relation is a teacher, guiding us to attune. And our question is how to work with these energies in the most conscious way possible. Different levels of consciousness, depending how we engage with these energies, they will manifest in a number of ways. So what we are asking here with the first step of visioning is, what is the largest and most worthwhile conscious expression of these energies? So for trauma survivors, for those of us who have been through trauma needs accompaniment because we are going through so many split energies. Like the attention will be wobbling over that split, and we do have a capacity to project the binary of that split energy onwards and outwards. Of course, where we are projecting the wisdoms of the splits onwards and outwards also always makes sense. Like, I don't think that the lens of trauma is always only an illusion. I think that the messages are called out, and people need to hear from you. So if you're having a binary split and you need to say something and you know that it's coming through your trauma, sometimes you still need to say it anyway. But if we are being beaten up by an inner oppressor and have to also fight against that inner oppressor, when that space in our energy field is activated, we will also be projecting that out as a weapon. So these projectiles are ideally what I see like healers having the capacity to carry with us. And I feel like the best way to understand healers is as an accompaniment to co-carry the capacity for weaponized projectiles. The best accompaniments are when people can show up for us as placeholders. That is what therapists and healing practitioners are, actually. They're a placeholder for the shadows, for the sorting, for the projectiles, where listening is also a space-giving action. So I do not see therapists and healing practitioners as being here to label our brains or to put consciousness in a framework. It might assist us at some point, but that depends on your choice and preference and what your goal is in regards to recognition from the social system that we live in. You most definitely have a right to be recognized in whichever way you need from a social system. On what is supportive for you in terms of accessing and remembering your liberation codes and being able to return to an infrastructure. But sometimes the external recognition, it might not come, and yet you still exist. So first comes inner recognition of our own map, self-definition. You are allowed to exist as an anomaly, as magic. So for folks healing, especially after abuse, which inadvertently is here for all of us, also mostly coming from beings who we love, especially early life caregivers who we unequivocally depend on for life. And there is no other way to survive but to submit to dependence, where ambivalence is a life-saving quality. So to release those codes of violence, it does take generating the kind of gaze of compassionate witnessing that is just not possible with one person's space. Sometimes it takes us in communion. So the whole mechanism of a therapeutic relation actually on the soul level is for having space enough within contradiction so that spirit is allowed in, or mystery or creation or imagination, and it takes many names, and that is why we enter into ritual. Because even in the space of another, even like the space of another human is not big enough to access something like or to access real compassion, real mercy. So that's why I work in session with rituals, because it's not me who's personally showing up there. It's spirit. And I understand very deeply that access to regular therapy is gatekept and barriered, and access to sessions with me is also severely limited, not just by our mutual access to economic resources, but also lack of having language, sometimes resonance. There's always a medium that I'm interacting with that dilutes everything outside of a session, like a screen. There's a lot of that I feel is about like me also bringing research out in ways which you can access it better, attempting to offer you pockets and tools that do not bring too much overhang or toxicity of the world in with it. So, I mean, in terms of my role here, I'm attempting to create the next modules from the psychic world and funnel it here as needed. And this is definitely a back of the wave role. So, you know, we are all a part of the wave of collective liberation, but this is one that operates in the hinter, like in the background, and is a roots powering mission. So the main point of what I'm saying here is to prioritize your own reflection time. We can also do this together by coming into communion, for sharing in a space where stories or experience can be aired amongst non-scrutiny. So templates of sharing in relation, for receiving the self-witnessing we need in order to open our body enough in order for us to clean out, rely on a non-shame projecting consistent gaze. And in terms of these clusters underneath, so these clusters, if they are built up emotions, like if they keep popping up and affecting your relational dynamics and you cannot leverage over them, that's when you go into ritual. That's when you're welcome to come in for a session. And in session, we open into transformative gaze, like a wide container. And me keeping my role in whichever way you see me. So the forgiveness that happens there from your side towards me is a part of the transformation. And that might sound really complicated, but use your healers as placeholders to receive the witness space you need or the alliance that you need. Healers anchor that space. And I think the most important healer is a healer who sees you as self-healing. So the one that sees you as having the capacity to self-witness, and that you're the point of that you're being there with them is about self-witnessing. Like they're not going to tell you, they're not going to reach into your field and do the healing for you, right? Like you are the medicine. Use your healers as placeholders to receive the witness space you need. Healers who are curse breakers also might reflect back to you what you don't want to see and like. It's always your decision whether you continue or not. Whether it be class, race, direction of gaze, some of that is nutritious to either define against or to integrate. And how do you define against? How do you integrate? Is it with tenderness? Is it with explosions? If so, where did the explosion come from? Whose voice was it speaking? How can you turn inwards to that voice? How can your vocation be informed by that voice? Who does that voice speak for? Some of my inner explosions, I realized the voice that was speaking was exiled parts within me, and I needed to better claim them and stick up for them and speak for them. How are these inner parts served by us, and how are they included by us? So we are not one thing, but many parts intermingling. One part of us might be attached to something world building, while another part of us might be attached to something releasing and of loss. Scan your map. Look for any like kinds of judgments, Where do those judgments expose unmet needs? Let's get to the core of your unmet needs. Once you understand what is the unmet need lying underneath, then you can move into the collection of resources. So your asking practice. If the asking practice itself is another relation which you struggle with, treat it as another and draw another constellation and a relational chord for the other of asking practice. So we start to understand that the others are also passing phenomena or algorithms themselves or clusters or complexes of bound energy. So the other is not really the other person. They are not wholly responsible for how you feel. You are responsible for how you feel. We cannot and do not aim to change others in this practice because we will burn out. We will really burn out. We aim to change how we perceive the other and what lessons we can learn about ourselves, our preferences, our liberation codes. Ultimately, we each can be making the inner work our own transmutation and showing up in relation with a buffet of relational liberation codes that are mutually beneficial. So that is the move into kinship. It will only be possible to move into that space if we are able to pass the initial dualities of the traumatized mind. So for this, we do need to drop into depth, drop into feeling, drop into heart, drop into contradictions and the distance space of witness. We're going to be talking much more about finding and holding space for those mutually beneficial liberation codes in future modules, how to see what the other is presenting us as an ask for love, how to receive the attention as love, how to understand your position, your vocation, your role through this, and then how to choose your joy. Because choosing your joy from depth unlocks curses which entangle all of us. You are here to suffer, sure, but not to be tortured any longer than is required for you to own your right to your own suffering, and that to be a reason to turn towards spiritual liberation. At your limit, hand it all to spirit. Receive the release of surrender. So when we're talking about the external world and the presence of the systemic, how much of the world is coming under your psychic skin? Do we want it there? Why is it here? What is it teaching us at this moment? And at which point is it leaning towards overstimulation or attention burnout? So for years, I also constellated without having the world infiltrating my inner landscape. So if you start and you just need to do this about family, then just keep it about family. Like I've added everything possible into the example. I added it here because it helps us develop a deconditioning or colonizing rooted liberational lens, also for the intergenerational or epigenetic lineage-based contents coming through you or setting you up to feel loads of certain emotions like urgency, for example, or guilt or shame. Looking at the ancestral context allows us to alleviate the pressure onto our individual selves and also into the people around us, especially early life caregivers. This is called falling into grace. So Sun Bu-May wrote a beautiful book on this called Falling Out of Grace, especially relevant for healing through our propensity to shoot off into neoliberalism. Shaming others, using the tools of the master. As Audre Lorde knows, the master's tools have no use here in dismantling this house. Relational constellations are alive. You and your map together have the capacity to bring into being the most unfathomable futures. Our projections actively create our future. This is why it's so important to read projections. If you can read projections at a point, you can walk the pathway of collecting back your split off power layer by layer into passion, into expansion. And in this way, if we keep an intimate connection to our constellation as it is alive through and with us, we co-create the worlds we are stepping into. So I added some maybe disclaimer pages on shadow work, position, and ancestral and elemental lenses. So it's important on shadow work that we note here that this practice acknowledges the collective unconscious, especially in this moment, as non-neutral. So that means that, like, at a certain point, if you have the collective unconscious coming in through the dreaming and it continually shows up as an aggressor, that doesn't mean that you are an aggressor or that that inner part of you is running havoc. Like, it might mean that you're aware that there's a part of you or that there's something inside of you which has the capacity of something. But you can get to a point where you're saying, no, that's not the way I choose to go, or that's not how I am, or like, I understand my capacity to act in that way in this moment, but I'm going to choose something else. And you can also understand that as like, okay, that's a collective spirit which is completely out of balance. And make your own rebalancing again, make your own forgiveness practice or releasing practice with that spirit. This especially happens with patriarchal energy, with policing energy, with groups of the police showing up in dreaming. We center beauty as protection. So what I mean by that is that, like, the shield that you can have to shield you from the collective unconscious as a non-neutral space, instead of it being like weapons, it can be beauty, like a gold shield or something. Because, like, if you have weapons, like attracts like. So protect the refusal with a layer of gold beauty. So lens on position. This form of practice is mainly for Europeans or colonial cultured folks who are deprogramming. This practice is also for Indigenous heritage folks who perhaps have multi-heritages and want to decondition in order to embrace and have their lineage's generative power boosted. This is an original set of practices from me. I'm not recreating. Like, I'm going to be referencing many, many sources and practices. So this is basically, at its core, Taoist relational shadow. Like, it's a bit tantric. It's a bit like, I mean, there are many principles that come through this. Ancient Chinese medicine comes through this. Dagara water wisdom comes through this. Like, practices of core shamanism come through this. And, like, under the banner of core shamanism, so many Indigenous practices from all over the world are recognized through those practices. I'm not really recreating or regenerating Indigenous owned practice. I'm referencing, like, when a perspective of mine is informed by an ancient practice, it will be referenced. So multi-perspective will be referenced from troll practice, and that can be accessed through Daniel Foer's book, Ancestral Healing. I also especially love the counter practice, which he talks about in that book. This practice also reroutes economy towards sacred land protection, cultural preservation of indigeneity. So, I mean, there is an ethical infrastructure behind this about my position as well. And when we're looking through the ancestral and elemental lens, most important about this is looking at how gaze is widened when we discuss lineage. This means that emotions do not belong to you alone. Also, when we discuss shadow and the intuition, we are aware here that collective shadow falls into susceptible containers, the empathic. So intuitional empathy can be like a catch-all. So very important here as well as the grounding of utopian fantasy. Always there is an importance to incubating. So perhaps we need those consciousness bubbles, especially while we heal complex trauma. So we need to jump off and have that retreat space. But jumping ahead into higher consciousness realms without deprogramming from white supremacy, for example, or deeply interrogating into class, gender, sexuality, ability, access, how aspects of white culture have reached us through appropriation, that would be bypass. So just to start the conversation on lineage retracing, I added some notes into the last page here. What kind of stories did your ancestors live? What kinds of emotion came up for them when they had none or no one to hold them? All of that will come through you. So we are attempting to be able to hold that in a non-personally attached way, to let it flow through us. So there's some templates for constellating for you here. This is also a different one with persona and identity, or your inner essential self, the personal and collective unconscious, the world, the pluriverse, the event horizon, so where the impossible sits, what's happening in your relation. This is an interesting one to play around with. Or totally blank pages. So there's a few further resource lists there, like the reading list I'm always updating. There's also texts on my website about what is an ancestral path, all about shadows, dream work. There's also a sound ceremony here, which is really nice to take. Like that's like an hour session, put headphones in and receive the trip, this one's particularly operating into depth. So the kinship and contradiction container is about modules, which you can take at your own pace. This practice is informed by circle culture teachings. Your individuality is here to inform the collective. So just because something is called individuality doesn't mean it's only the responsibility of one human. Individuality is important for expansion and always important for the collective. Think individuality. There's dual in the middle of this world, in this word. The more there is openness, curiosity, and trust between the collective hive mind and the delicate preferences of the individual, the more support each can give and receive to each other, the more in alignment and in expansion both bodies are, so the personal and the collective. So the signs of a collective that refuse to support individuality as messages of nuance, expose the dis-ease of a hive mind energy to control out of fear and mistrust. So to support true individuality in ourselves and within another takes a lot of shadow work, I guess, so our own control mechanisms of the psyche do not hold others back in our differences, but rather lift others up with belief and trust in their most peculiar skills and special gifts. So circle cultures are modeled through Ubuntu and Dagara wisdom. So Ubuntu is I am because you are, the practice of empathy, which is African wisdom. Your unique experience, your multi-perspectives are here to inform all of us and the collective as a whole. Your individual expression is not taken as a challenger to the status quo because there is no status quo. There are cycles and circles, flowing balance, instigation, energy has its role, and the dismantling is also a form of creation. So when we really embrace destruction as a valid form of coming into being, this is a teaching from earth and from darkness, which births all. There's a essay, Destruction as a Form of Coming into Being, written by Sabrina Spielrein. That's through the psychoanalytic lens, through the Jungian psychoanalytic lens, who talks about this earth, the volcano. Even though it hurts, without our dry egos being submerged in the chaos of soul waters, in the chaos of contradiction, there is no evolution, no freedom, no consistent promise of life. And this is the initiation that catalyzes the rebirth. And real communion is our return into wholeness, which will always hold contradictions from the mind's perspective. So that doesn't mean that you need to stay in rational relation with all. You can also, know is a sacred container of relation as much as yes. So without making a monolith of this, because also there might be similarities which we see, there might be much more nuances that we're just not differentiate enough to really able to be able to hold space for yet. So there's no monolith of relational teaching or indigenous teaching. There's no monolith of earth and elemental relation. And that's why it's so powerful, because the consciousness exists in a completely interconnected cosmology. It's not only about how I feel about someone or how I see someone or how someone sees me. That's still so separatist. Relation is not attachment theory, where we are more likely to be led into assuming ourselves to be one pattern and then get locked in that. Sure, it's a great way to enter into mapping, but you might not wish to stay there. Perhaps it will give you a pathologist gaze on the world. Everyone will be locked into a theory. Everyone will be faulty. Opening into a cosmology that is relational, multidirectional, means there is no right and no wrong. There is only nuance, layers, and perspectives. Of course, there is still a barometer of where our capacity lies, in what we accept near us or not, in how we honor ourselves or not. But we do not need to make the other wrong in order to do so. We can just see that what we need is not there, or beings are not yet through a lesson of a teaching which we need our closest to be aware of. A cosmology that includes lineage, that includes ancestors speaking through our bodies, that includes elements and natures speaking to and with us, that includes passing phenomena, that world as oracle, which I will get into later, that samsara is a divinatory tool, even if it is a hell or a lack matrix or an endless knot. To get back to that cosmology and that level of interconnectedness, the deprogramming of how we perceive ourselves and how we map is huge. It's a total rewiring of the psyche, a rewiring of gaze, because gaze is not only about the eyes, it's a relational cognition. It's our openness to knowing and forms of knowing. So we are moving into a much more inclusive form of knowing. The form of knowing means co-emergence leads, co-emergence, magnetism leads, confusion leads, breaking apart from the individual leads. And because this is cyclic, regression is part of the journey, just as we see the winter return, the ego self will revert and want to return, and when it does, we let it dip into the spirit world. When projections fall, we go willingly. Loss is the opening of the spirit world. So there is a lot about having inner space. This does not mean this does mean being more aware about your spatial capacity within your body, and to stop pre-reaching that capacity. So the state, the machine, the extraction will want to take that inner capacity, because without that inner capacity, you are easy to control, because you have no space for emergence of the new world within you, and your capacity for regeneration, for your own agency, creativity is gone. The most important thing this year and going forward, I believe, is that inner reserve of capacity, of space. This is the same place where grieving is the technology of emergence. Bayo, I can't remember how to say his last name. Let me, Bayo Akomolafe said that grieving is the technology of emergence. This is where the essential self gets born. Community is an organism where each single part is as honored as the whole. So this was a long intro. It is meant so you can re-listen as much as you would like while you draw your constellations. And perhaps on the re-listen, you might receive a different word as a spark each time. I'm aware I repeated myself a lot. So on the re-listen, perhaps you will receive a different word as a spark each time. With much love and support of your true individuality in all of its nuances and mega complexities. See you on the first module. Bye.